Marcy, welcome back to the program.
Always good to be on.
So on October 30th, you wrote a piece in the New Republic entitled, "If Trump Fires Mueller," anticipating that perhaps after the election, we may see some action on that front. And we did, but it started with Jeff Sessions. Let's start with that. But what is the top line that we should be aware of at this point following the election in regards to Trump and Trump Inc., I guess, in terms of their legal jeopardy?
We don't know. We don't know. And I don't think we'll know for about a week or so about what happens with Mueller. And it may be within that week that we actually learn a lot more about what kind of legal jeopardy Trump is in.
So this is going to be a busy week. All right. Well,
maybe Mueller will get fired and we'll all go to the beach or something.
Right. Okay. Well, all right. Let's start with this then. Let's walk through the firing, because I think the piece that I think is most instructive of yours, at least for the moment, the most comprehensive, is the question: did Ebbett flood mean to create a legal morass, or is he off his game? So Donald Trump. So Emmett Flood was, by your reckoning, one of the few competents that Donald Trump brought on board. He was he helped Cheney deal with the special counsel in Congress back in the day. He's a longtime Washington, I guess, lawyer defending politicians in various things. I think he was involved in maybe even Clinton's impeachment.
Yep.
All right. So let's start with this question of what is the relevance of whether Jeff Sessions was fired and or resigned, and when?
Okay. So really quickly to go over what happened is starting at 11:30 the day after the election, Trump gave a press conference, lied about how well the Republicans had done. When that was going on, Trump had already had John Kelly call Sessions and say, "We want your resignation." Sessions said, "Can I have until the end of the week?" Kelly called back later and said, "Nope, we want it today." And he replaced Sessions with his chief of staff, a guy by the name of Matt Whitaker. And Whitaker, on paper, is sort of qualified. He was U.S. attorney for one of the districts in Iowa under Bush. So, yeah, he's a lawyer at least, which, you might not get that from Trump.
Right.
But he's really a hack. I mean, he's kind of the quintessential Republican hack. He spent much of 2017 saying, here's how to get rid of the Mueller probe. He was interviewed that summer for a job as part of Trump's White House counsel defense team. And then in the fall, he didn't get the White House counsel job. He was made Jeff Sessions' chief of staff. Sessions' chief of staff was given a big promotion, creating an opportunity there. The White House forced Sessions to hire this guy, Whitaker. And so he has been a senior DOJ official for a year. And under some interpretations of the law, that means that if Sessions resigns, you can replace him with somebody of sufficient seniority in a temporary appointment. And that's what that's what Trump claims happened. Now, it's clear that Sessions was forced to resign. He made that clear in the first line of his letter. And the Democrats in the House
I would just be clear on that. In the first line of his letter, he said, "You've asked my resignation. Here it is." Right? It was something to that effect.
Right,
I'm paraphrasing, but he made it clear that he didn't offer this except for upon at the very least, the insistence or the request. And there may be no difference, right, when you're talking about the president, that he resigned.
Right. And also, frankly, if Kelly says, "Can we have your resignation?" He says, "Friday you can have it." And Kelly says, "No, we want it today." That seems to me it's a coerced it's an even more coerced resignation. And the Democrats in the House are making it very clear that they believe it was a firing. If he was fired, if Sessions was fired, then Whitaker's appointment is not legal, because you can only have him in place rather than somebody who's Senate confirmed if Sessions resigns. Basically, the idea is the president can't fire somebody to then put in place somebody who was not Senate confirmed. In addition, there are a couple of other questions about whether he would be a legal appointment as well, including from Neil Katyal, who is the guy who wrote the special counsel regulations, and George Conway, Kellyanne Conway's husband. And they argue that, for one, because you have a Senate-confirmed person right there in the form of Rod Rosenstein, who is the person who would take over if the Attorney General were gone or disabled, you got to go with him. You can't go with this hack from Iowa. And you also, there are rules that say you can't do this in DOJ. Katyal has written another piece that says even if his appointment is legal, he can't supervise Mueller, because then you have basically an inferior officer supervising an inferior officer. In other words, there's a bunch of reasons to think that his appointment is not legal and that his supervision of Mueller is not legal. And, everyone's talking about, well, we don't know and we won't be able to decide whether that's true or not unless somebody gets standing and challenges his appointment in court. But that's actually not true. And this is one of the most interesting things from last week. CNN did this great, thus far, like one of the only really good reports on the firing. And it described how, as soon as John Kelly called Sessions, he and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who's the guy who's overseeing Mueller right now, his principal deputy, who is also involved in overseeing Mueller, and this is really key, the Solicitor General, Noel Francisco, who's the third-ranking DOJ official, assuming Sessions is still there. On that day, he was the third-ranking. And then also Stephen Engel, who is in charge of the Office of Legal Counsel, who, again, Senate-confirmed, very senior DOJ official. All of them, with the exception of Rosenstein's deputy, all of them were senior to Whitaker. And they're sitting in the room with Jeff Sessions going, what do we do and how do we protect the Russian investigation? And according to CNN's report, somebody in that room that they don't name said, we don't even know if this is constitutional, just like the rest of us are, except the difference being that in that room, Stephen Engel is the guy who, for DOJ, for the entire executive branch, is the one who decides whether these things are legal. So I at least suspect that those people said, okay, Steve, give us an opinion, give us a memo, and how soon can you have it done? Because if he comes back and says, no, it's not legal under the Vacancies Reform Act, you can't have, you can't appoint Whitaker when Rosenstein's available, then it's not legal, and DOJ is arguing that it's not legal. And one of the things I point out is that Sessions' resignation is not dated, much less time-stamped.
Okay. Hold on with Sessions not being dated. I just want to get into that dynamic about the OLC. So the OLC, for people who don't recall, was the agency within the Department of Justice, the sub-agency, I guess, that, let's say, the Bush administration went to and said, we need legal justification to torture. John, you wrote this up and whatnot. If the OLC writes it up, is it necessarily binding? Like, doesn't it still have to go to court at one point, or is that just a way to basically say the OLC is saying to the Trump administration, like, you have no legal standing, like you'll have to come up with a theory on your own because the government doesn't have one as to why it would be legal for you or constitutional, I guess maybe legal because this is under a statute, right, to appoint Whitaker in this instance, right?
And they're pointing to they actually are pointing to an old OLC opinion written by Ed Whelan, for those of you who remember Ed Whelan's role in the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation. Yes. But it isn't exact. It doesn't exactly follow to what we're looking at here. And the only time, that people who know this stuff can think of where you had somebody in charge of DOJ who wasn't confirmed for more than hours, was during Watergate, after Borg was firing people. And so, it's never happened before. There's no precedent. And, the White House is saying, well, there's this Ed Whelan opinion, but if Engel is either did or is revisiting the issue, then that poses other legal problems. And it also gives Mueller an opportunity to say, and he's writing a memo about this right now as we speak, by the way, but it gives Mueller an opportunity to say the D.C. Circuit, oh, DOJ has told me that Whitaker is not a legal appointee, and therefore I'm still reporting to the person who, in the absence of an attorney general, in the absence of an attorney general who can do this, I'm still reporting to the guy that I'm supposed to be reporting to, which is Rod Rosenstein. And so this is one of the reasons I say we don't know what is going to happen. I just have a hunch that something like this is going on. And and then there are the other questions about, even if Whitaker was legally appointed, he's got all these conflicts. He's run a political campaign for one of the grand jury witnesses. He had all these statements before he was appointed, both attacking the Mueller investigation, but also saying, oh, sure, everyone would take the same meeting that Don Jr. took.
Right.
And he, as I said, and he was interviewed to be part of Trump's defense team. So that is also problematic.
So there's all sorts of conflicts, not the least of which he was part of a company, I guess, that was investigated by the FBI. You sort of didn't mention that.
Still being investigated, as far as we know.
Yeah,
still being investigated.
Sometimes these things slip the mind, Marcy, and you forget about those things. But the long and short of it is, at the very least, regardless of how these questions would be answered, what they do provide is a grounds in which Mueller would contest any actions that Whitaker would take that would slow roll his investigation, that would defund his investigation, that would do anything else. Because he would then go, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just trying to understand how sort of this practically goes forward. He would then go to the D.C. Circuit and I guess to a panel of 3 judges and say, please enjoin him from doing this because A, all of the things that are sort of public that we know about make his hiring invalid, and B, there's also, and there may be, this is hypothetical, an OLC memo that suggests that his hiring's not valid, that he's not really the guy. So, I mean, is that how it would work? That's how it would play out if it goes down that route?
Yeah, and it may not go down that route. I mean,
Right,
it may
right.
be that on Thursday, Rosenstein said, you guys blew the resignation and we have until Friday to put stuff in place. It may be that Mueller already has indictments sitting, waiting to be unsealed, and he's just kind of finishing with Jerome Corsi, among all people. It may be that, so there are a bunch of possibilities. Obviously Mueller's not telling. We'll find a couple of hints. As I said, he's writing a brief due on Monday, a week from today, in a subpoena challenge of somebody close to Roger Stone. And that subpoena challenge was heard. The hearing was heard last Thursday, and there were some interesting things that Michael Dreeben, who works for the Solicitor General, that he basically said, well, we can indict somebody on our own. We can, give somebody immunity on our own. We can do a plea agreement on our own. We can't subpoena a journalist on our own. So, he was sort of laying out what he thought they could do without going to their superior, which may be Whitaker, maybe Rosenstein still, we don't know. And that by itself was interesting, but the judges on that panel said, they started that hearing by saying, let's pretend that what happened yesterday didn't happen, and then we're going to ask you to give us more briefing on what you think, what did happen yesterday, has an impact on this challenge. And so we'll learn on Monday, if not before, what Mueller thinks his legal status is and how Whitaker's appointment changed it. So, we may not know until then, but we should learn on Monday.
Okay, so just to be clear, we are pre-taping this on Monday the 12th. Between now and then, there could be, Mueller will have a better sense of his status. It's quite possible that by, midway through this week, because of the nature in which they solicited Sessions' resignation, that the statute in which they're operating under, which applies if a guy like Sessions actually resigns rather than is forced to resign, nullifies Whitaker's appointment and makes it too susceptible to legal challenges. So they have to basically do a do-over or just give up the ghost on this plan. You mentioned the idea of Mueller already having indictments. Will you walk us through that? It's almost a fail-safe type of mechanism, at least to the extent that it exists. We don't know that it does, but that Mueller sort of may have anticipated a day like today, or probably did. And
he certainly did, yes.
Right. And so what does that mean? There are sealed indictments. Just walk us through what would have happened up to this point if today there are X number of sealed indictments. Who would they be sitting with? Who could unseal them? Who could stop them from being unsealed, if anybody?
So we don't know whether this happened or not. And there's a lot of hoax, there's a lot of rumors on the internet claiming there are, 100 sealed indictments. I would distrust that. But it is, in fact, true that, obviously Mueller anticipated something like this might happen. The Friday before Election Day, he was really pressuring to get some witnesses against Roger Stone on the record. So just for example, it's possible he finished an indictment against Stone, had the grand jury vote to approve it, and then left it sealed. And if that's the case, once the indictment, as far as I understand it, once the indictment is done and sealed, then it no longer belongs to DOJ. It belongs to the court, and in this case, it would belong to the judge overseeing the grand jury, which is the chief judge in D.C. Her name is Beryl Howell, Obama appointee. She has been totally by the book, and I can envision her being, the next incarnation of John Sirica. So it would be up to her. And Mueller could go and ask to have it unsealed. One of the interesting things that happened, there's been a lot of talk about how Mueller sent parts of the investigation to other places, most notably the Michael Cohen hush payment stuff to Manhattan, basically. And that's a really independent U.S. Attorney's office, and that's going to be as hard to fiddle with as fiddling with Mueller is, just because that's the culture of SDNY. So that's one way that we know he protected parts of his investigation. We know that Trump is being investigated in that. Trump committed campaign violations in that case. Wall Street Journal reported that the other day. The other thing that he did is 3 of his team members have already been spun back to their home departments. And they're just there as protected employees of DOJ, and if something haywire went to go on, and there's good reason to believe that they're continuing to work on related issues, they could then go to the court and say, we want these grand jury materials because they pertain to our day job. So they could free them, once the Democrats take over in the House. Okay. If things went really haywire, they could try and go get those grand jury materials. So there are ways to get that, which is very different.
Let me just recap, though, so that people aren't lost, because there's a lot of information there. So, okay, so we don't know how many indictments Mueller has. We know that it's been reported that there's at least one or two. Any. Hasn't there been reports that there's at least one sealed indictment, maybe from a couple of months ago? Is it possible that he would have? But let's just assume that we don't know. It could be anywhere from 0 to, I don't know, whatever number. let's just pick a number, 25 indictments.
Yeah, I want to emphasize it could be 0, though.
Okay.
I really want to emphasize that.
So it could be 0, but if there were anything more than 0, they would be with the judge. You mentioned Soraka. I didn't know how to pronounce his name, but this was just recently revealed that there was basically a plan. Is that who you're referring to? The judge from the Watergate case? Okay, and these were recently released by I guess it was a FOIA. And I want to ask you what you think about the timing of that, but just to cover where we just covered. So these indictments are there, and they could be unsealed. If Mueller was fired tomorrow by hook or crook, you're suggesting that people from his team who have been re-embedded back in the DOJ could go to the judge, and there is basically almost like a thread hanging from there from other stuff that they're doing that would unseal these indictments? Or could Mueller
maybe not unseal it, but maybe pick up the prosecution in their home area? So one of the prosecutors who's been spun back is a woman named Kyle Freeney, and she's a money laundering specialist. So she's back, I think, in New York. And if Mueller was fired tomorrow, could she then pick up bribery and money laundering? Yeah, maybe. And she'd be in New York, and it'd be a lot harder to screw with her. So that's another possibility, is that you've got these team members who know their portfolio, they're part of the portfolio, and even if you fired the entire Mueller team today, they'd still be there with the knowledge and with the ability to free up grand jury materials for further prosecution.
Okay, great. So assuming all of that is there, and how would could Mueller do anything with those things, or is it just up to the judge at that point to say, like, okay, I'm watching this go down, and it's time for me to unseal these indictments?
Well, somebody from DOJ has to ask to have them be unsealed. So, it could be somebody from Mueller's team. Most of Mueller's people are DOJ employees, so they're actually harder to fire, and they could go and say, we need to unseal these indictments. Again, if there are any, and I want to stress that there may not be, that they could then, basically somebody has to go to the judge and say, we gave you a good reason to seal these back on November 2nd when we handed them up. Now it's time for us to unseal them. We're going to go arrest these guys. And that's how it would work. But ultimately, it's Beryl Howell's. It's the judge. It's her decision to unseal, and it's her decision what happens with the grand jury materials. And that's something that could be litigated forever. But that's kind of the real fail-safe, that if everybody is fired, the House Judiciary Committee is going to come after those materials, and it would be up to Beryl Howell to decide whether or not to share them.
All right, so let's just go down that road for a moment too. Is it possible that the House Judiciary Committee comes in, January 22nd or something? They convene their first, they have their staff, and let's say Mueller is fired. Now, could they hire Mueller as a staffer? I mean, what?
They're not going to.
Okay.
They won't. Different committees in the House are going to do different things. Schiff is going to pick up a lot of the threads of the Russian investigation that were dropped under Devin Nunes. So,
right.
You should expect some attention into the finances. You should expect witnesses who avoided testimony, like Hope Hicks. She was allowed to not answer all the questions, and she obviously knows a lot about the response to the June 9th meeting, for example. So they'll bring them back, and they'll flesh out certain other areas of the investigation. It goes to the House. The reason the House Judiciary is important is because if there were an investigation of the president that might turn into impeachment, that goes through the House Judiciary Committee, and they're important. That's where the Watergate precedent is worthwhile. In Watergate, what Jaworski did, what the prosecutor did, was he said, okay, here's what I would do if I were going to impeach the president. Can't do that. So let me take the actions that I would impeach him for put together, basically box up the information, the evidence I have for all of the actions the president took that I would impeach him for, and have the grand jury vote to share that information as a kind of freestanding report that makes no accusations. It just says, here's what the president did and here's the proof. Have the grand jury vote to be able to share that with the House Judiciary Committee. That's what happened during Watergate, and I would imagine one of Mueller's attorneys actually worked on the Watergate team. I would imagine that Mueller is taking certain lessons from Watergate, and I would imagine that he would at some point, and possibly did before the election, thinking something like this might happen, at some point do something similar. Have the grand jury give him permission to share information with House Judiciary if it comes to that. So that's how House Judiciary would get the information. Trump is worse than Nixon. Nixon actually okayed the sharing of that information back in the day, and Trump, I would imagine, would fight it because Trump is Trump. But then Brett Kavanaugh will get to decide or something like that. I mean, look, ultimately, some of the arguments that Trump is already making, and that the appointment of Whitaker makes, is that the judiciary has no role, isn't a third branch of government with its own power to keep people in line and enforce the law. And that's the kind of stuff that pisses off judges and justices, regardless of what party. And the Nixon precedent, I think, is a pretty solid precedent. I don't think, even this court is going to overturn it in substantial fashion. So that's sort of where we could be headed if things go really haywire. But who knows? Maybe Mueller will be able to work out the week. He'll go indict Roger Stone, and then we'll be in business.